Welcome to Let's Talk Business Transformation by OSF Digital. Today, we're joined by Rob Smith, Global VP of Technology, who takes us inside the future of AI agents, digital labor, and business innovation, with practical insights every leader should know. Let's dive in. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the show. So as we head into Dreamforce, agentic AI continues to kind of be at the top of everybody's mind. Everybody's pondering how are they going to transition into this agent-first workforce in the future. And with that in mind, I thought of you as the perfect person to talk to. So for those listening, they're going to walk into Dreamforce, whether in person or digitally, looking for, what's the biggest takeaway that they can actually incorporate in their business and their day-to-day, right? They're going to see keynotes, they're going to see webinars, they're going to see all the marketing information they're going to get from everybody after the show in their email. But they're going to be looking for, okay, tangibly, what can I actually take and incorporate in my business? So I thought you were the first person that everybody should hear from. I think you're right at the tip of the spear of this stuff. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. So let's dive right in.
Cool.
Agents are evolving really, really fast. Just in the last 6 to 9 months, what kind of changes have you seen how companies are starting to build and deploy them?
Oh, it's been rapid progress, right? I do think it's a tale of two sides, really. I do see some companies that are really diving in, experimenting, both at a leadership level and also at a kind of team level, and trying to really make the most of what they see, which is good to see. And then I do see quite a lot of companies that haven't really made a lot of progress at all. Right? They thought about a lot of things. They might have discussed quite a number of things, but what they certainly haven't seemed to do is try anything. And the absolute key with AI by a very long way is that you've got to get stuck in and start trying these tools and seeing how they work out for you, whether that's internally or with external facing agents or whatever. I think the other thing with the past 6 to 9 months is that we've rapidly evolved from this idea of kind of assistants and ChatGPT-esque, personal chatbots, whatever you want to call it. I've heard it called about 20 different things, to agents. Agents have become a real thing. Agents that can act on their own autonomously. They can reason. They can pick what action to take. And that's a big shift in itself. And that's after the big shift of generative AI, right? So we're seeing these kind of quite seismic shifts coming quite quickly, one after each other. So those two different types of companies, if you're in the one that's just on a watch and see and wait brief, you fall further behind really quite quickly, I would say.
So looking at that dichotomy, right, you've got looking at the side of it where we're starting to see some really serious agents come online, capable of deeper reasoning. Can you share an example of two, just of people that you're working with or things that you're seeing out in the field of what that actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, a lot of people will be thinking about legacy chatbots that they might have interacted on various websites over time, where it gives you this limited menu of questions for you to, I want to talk about an order. I want to talk about a product. I want to, and it goes down this deterministic tree of choices that gets you to some kind of limited kind of action. And that's what people are used to when they hear about or think about chatbots. And then for a long time on, say, the search side and the information side, we've been used to Google as a paradigm. Whereas now what we're tending to see is that chatbot has become an agent. And for a lot of people, they're still calling it bots. I'm in plenty of customer meetings where they still call it a bot or they still call it a robot, chatbot, whatever it is. But there's such a key difference that instead of this tree of decision making, well, it's not even decisions, tree of options. You have an agent now that can hear what the customer says. So the customer can say something like, "I need to return a product from my most recent order because it's faulty." And just off that one statement, they can reason very quickly that, yes, this is about orders, but more than that, it's about returns. More than that, it's about a faulty product. And more than that, it was my most recent order. So now with just a few more questions to validate and identify that customer correctly, we can get a really long way down the line of serving that customer in a much more interactive and kind of chat-based way, right? So, and then you see with Google doing a similar thing, that our Google searches are becoming more massive questions, yeah? And we're getting these big kind of fat AI kind of generated responses. So this shift is happening quickly. And in terms of customers, we've deployed some very cool customers. We're just about to deploy a consumer goods agent that'll handle everything from complaints to product suggestions to general nutritional inquiries to lots of different things. And for over a month now, maybe a couple of months, we've had a fully fledged retail agent in place for David Yeoman, which customers can hear a lot about at Dreamforce. If they didn't already, which handles all of those kind of product inquiries, order inquiries, stock inquiries, both in store and online. And we're already seeing fantastic results, such as on that David Yeoman one, when they walk in to the business every Monday after the phone lines, their customer care team has been closed for a short while. Their backlog of cases has halved. And they had a legacy chatbot doing all these things, just wasn't doing it all that well. And they've upgraded it to this fully reasoned agent, and it's made a massive difference to their business.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, looking at the other side of that dichotomy, right? If I'm a leader that hasn't jumped into the full AI, agentic AI space, the people who are listening to you and thinking, Rob, that sounds great. I know I probably should be jumping full into my agentic future, but we don't even have the fundamental blocking and tackling down. How could I possibly think about agents right now, right? How are companies balancing the fact that, yes, they need to innovate towards the agentic workforce at speed, like David Yearman, but they may be lacking some of those fundamental technical necessities that they need to innovate?
Yeah. I think it's a key topic, right? So the two things that often come up in our conversations are data and integration, because data is the thing that really fuels the agent's understanding, right? So if the agent doesn't have good data on that customer or good data on your products, or that data is not available for whatever reason, then it's not going to be a very intelligent agent, unfortunately, because everything's about context. Everything about helping our customers and helping our internal employees and teams is about context, right? Generic answers we can get right now from ChatGPT, and it does that job very well, right? We don't need to build that tool again. What we need is really context understanding agents, in the case of customers and also for our teams. The other one, integration, is then the ability to act. So if data is the ability to understand, then integration is the ability to act. And that is that connection to other systems. So as an example, in a retail space, the ability to return an order means that the agent needs the action to be able to refund that order. Otherwise, we've got an incomplete thing and we're leaving work for other people to do, whatever part of the workforce that is. Or if we think about it in a financial services environment, if we want an agent that's able to detect fraud or look at someone's transaction history and do something about it, then it needs that data, the understanding, needs the transaction history, but it also needs the ability to freeze the card or alert the customer, send them a text message, whatever it is, to be able to drive usefulness and actual return of these agents. Because it's no good that they're just smart. They've got to give us a business return, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. And I think that's a really good place to start. I think the only other thing I'd say on that is about business process. And business process is often much more a bag of human sticky tape than we might give it credit for. Some companies are really well written down their standard operating procedures, and everyone follows them really well, and they've got great onboarding. But they are the exception in my experience of working with companies. Lots of processes have a lot of, well, then this team does that, and I'm not quite sure how they do that. And you go to that team and that bit's not written down, and so there's this, as I say, human sticky tape in the process, and an agent can't work with that. So what's great about the digital workforce we're building now, the agentic workforce, is that that's going to be a forcing function to really get rid of that process gap, because then we can drive much more automation and outcomes.
So if we look at companies that are relying on those human judgment calls right now, right, the human sticky tape, as you alluded to, kind of as the crutch that their organization is working on a people and process standpoint, what happens to them if they don't evolve? What is the proverbial risk they can mitigate against if they're putting in agentic AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we should also think about agentic AI versus automation, right? because it's not really a versus, it's a hand-in-hand coupling, really, of these two things together. We shouldn't use AI and reasoning and all the stuff that it's good at to execute what is effectively a known automated process, right? Because it's a very expensive way to do it. Basically, why would you pay the AI costs? Because all of these AI tools, especially for businesses, are going to end up being consumption based, obviously, because every single call needs power and kind of cost. So don't use AI for the wrong problem. Use AI for that reasoning layer, and also that kind of deciding what to do to take action, understanding lots of data at once, all of that kind of thing. Don't use it for step-by-step automation, where you can use other parts of your kind of architecture for that. Certainly in Salesforce, there's lots of options there. But if they don't sort out those kind of sticky tapey plaster bits, they'll be forever dependent on effectively an inefficient workforce. And this is going to say, it sounds a little bit callous because we've seen all the stuff in the news about kind of people firing jobs because of AI. Oh, it's terrible. There's a coming apocalypse and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is that if these processes are capable of being automated, a lot of them are on their way to being automated already. If they're capable of being done by agents, then that is a natural kind of continuum. Just in the same way that we don't really use horses anymore to drag canal boats around to transport coal, right? Things do evolve into better methods, more efficient methods. And so the gap between those companies that don't adopt a more efficient workforce, which is a combination of human and AI working together, will get ever wider and it will be harder to catch up. Over time, there's a massive place for human interaction. In fact, we crave it. Even there's a whole analog movement of people wanting to go full analog now and get rid of digital and all this kind of thing. And that there's a fair amount of stuff to that. But if you ask me whether I want to talk to an agent who in one short conversation can arrange my return and refund within a few, just a couple of messages, or do I want to call center or send an email and wait for a response for a human? I will tell you it's an agent all day long. I do value my convenience in that way, and everyone else will once they start interacting with this. That was a really long answer to a short question.
No, I think I think it leads us right into the next part of the conversation that I really wanted to talk about, which is kind of the mythos that is built around AI, right? I think there's a general concern and fear that's been built around kind of the agentic future, right? But also, I think there's been a lot of misconceptions just by organizations trying to implement this stuff at the spearhead of it, right? So a lot of companies are using AI as their proverbial magic bullet, right? And they think it's going to solve a lot of their issues and will be the thing that fix all of the technical problems they've had up to this point, right? So why do you think that that's the wrong way to think about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's almost two questions in there, right? The magic bullet side of it with AI, and also the tip of the spear thing, because there's a couple of parts to this. First of all, the magic bullet. You might have seen on LinkedIn or other places these kind of little graphics of top management saying we need AI and when do we want it? We want it now. What do we want? We don't know. This kind of thing. There's an element of truth to that, right? They see the ship sailing off and they kind of need to jump on it. And there is a lot of kind of noise in the system talking about how AI can really accelerate things or solve things or is doing amazing stuff like diagnosing people better than doctors do and all of this kind of thing. Right? The issue is most of those great results that are coming from AI is where it's been grounded really well in that data that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's when it's given that access and everything to other systems. So, and it's where that business process is clear, right? If those three building blocks aren't there or aren't prepared to change or whatever, then AI is not going to create good results. So the magic bullet part of it is an absolute myth. It still requires hard work, still requires a lot of thinking, probably requires even more thinking than a lot of technical projects because you're thinking in a new way. You're thinking about how can I build not just one agent, but how can I start to think about my agentic workforce and how I can put that together to work with my human workforce to execute processes in a different way than they were executed before. It's not an evolution; it's a reasonably significant rewrite if you get it right. We've got one customer in the UK at the moment who, when we approached them, we said, what if we do this project, which is a big Salesforce transformation project, the adoption of Salesforce for all of their business process to drive their kind of customer experience and kind of a lot of their decision making as well internally. And we said, what if we approach this in an AI first way? What if we started everything as if we would involve AI and build an AI workforce? And that's been a challenge on both sides, right? We've all had to think in a new way to do that. Whereas a lot of people at the moment are thinking, how can I add AI to what I'm already doing?
Mhm.
And it's a good question. It's not a bad place to start, but we're going to have to evolve that thinking quite soon.
A lot to chew on there. So another kind of misconception that I hear you talk about a lot that I wanted to make sure that we covered today is just inputs and assumptions and how they could potentially lead to poor results. I'm thinking about things like product discoverability or how, SEO versus ChatGPT use, right? Just the evolving landscape that everybody's going to have to think about as they think about how they're going to be discovered in the world of AI. So I just wanted you to take a moment to talk about that idea of how poor inputs and assumptions tend to lead to poor results in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. If we pick up on that example you're talking about with kind of, Google, SEO, AEO, GEO, whatever you want to call it, right? So this is the difference between, if you take a typical retailer or any kind of, financial services or travel, hospitality, hotels, whatever it is, the ability for customers to find you, right, and discover who you are. And there's this thought process at the moment that there's this brand new thing coming around called AEO or GEO, where you optimize things for these chat engines, effectively these assistants like ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever it is. I've dug into this quite a lot because I was genuinely interested to see, well, what is the difference? And the real bottom line of the whole thing is that, yes, there might be a few technical things that you could do on your site or whatever it is in your app to kind of give those tools pointers towards the content that they might need. But the real reality of it is that it's continuing to be about relevance. If you are a good product that people want, then you will tend to show up. If people are writing about you a lot more, or there's more to say, or you're creating more buzz and interest and whatever, all of these things are feeding. Yes, they're feeding traditional search engines and now Gemini on Google's side, but they're also feeding Perplexity and OpenAI models when they update them to the latest information and that kind of thing. So if anything, I don't see that a lot has changed, and people are making this assumption that everything is a brand new thing, and that's not quite true. The fundamentals of talking with customers and engaging with customers, no matter what your business, still have a reasonable bedrock in being good at what you do and supplying them with what they want, and producing quality things that people want to interact with. People do want to interact with quality content. They do want to be educated on certain subjects. And so you're more likely to be mentioned. Only kind of worry is that increasingly it does look like it might be harder to get discovered on what I will call the kind of long tail of certain areas. So, you do see, if you ask ChatGPT to recommend you holiday destinations and that kind of thing within a certain criteria, you do tend to see the same answers again and again and again. And not just the same countries, but the same cities, the same tourist attractions, the same kind of whatever. And this kind of applies to restaurants and it applies to lots of things as well. And so this ability to disrupt and be noticed is potentially a little bit harder. But then I'm also seeing a movement off the other way to kind of say, well, these places are all getting too crowded. Show me the real Japan. Show me the real whatever. And so you're actually getting, so there's ways and means to niche and still be noticed, I think.
Yeah, to that point, right, of a certain bedrock of, let's just use restaurants as an example. We're thinking about Dreamforce right now. We're planning out some ancillary events and dinners and places people would want to take to. I don't live in San Francisco. I use ChatGPT to give me the short list, and the same places came up over and over again, right? But as that criteria got more specific and the places that had a volume of content about whatever specificity I was looking for, right, whether it be the the fine dining aspect of it or the experiential aspect of it right, I found new things. So I think there is some potential there, and hopefully as people get better at prompting, they'll find the specificity they're
Well,
looking for.
that's a really interesting point, Pat. I think it's really, really key, because the long tail of SEO was always about kind of those bigger keyword searches, 4, 5, 6 keyword searches, right? Now, because we can ask questions, and not just questions, we can ask follow-up questions. This idea of a long tail of niches is probably just as powerful, if not potentially more powerful than it was before. But you've really got to know who your customer is. You've really got to know who the niche is. Previously people would try and rank for kind of, I don't know, winter jackets or, winter down jackets or, something specific, 2, 3 keywords. Now it's about writing content and writing stuff that can be noticed, that kind of brings all that together to answer questions such as, I am going to Canada in November and I'm going to be in Ottawa. What kind of clothing do I need? You know what I mean? It's those kind of things. So having content that says how to dress in Ottawa in December or November or whatever I said, is a completely different ballgame. But basically still the same value that you're offering customers. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. Hopefully a deeper dive into brain associations as we move forward. So given that we're talking about Dreamforce as the kind of the bedrock of this conversation, I think it's good for us to just really dive into the future of Agentforce for just a moment. So looking ahead, what excites you most about Agentforce really is the proverbial command center of a company's digital labor force.
Yeah, I think let's start with why it works quite well already for companies, because the themes expand from there. One of the things we mentioned earlier is about companies being on the tip of the spear of AI, right? And I have seen quite a few companies that are pulling together, a bit of open AI, a bit of kind of integration, a bit of Copilot maybe, to do some initial pilots and that kind of thing. And always the kind of concern that comes across from kind of InfoSec teams or IT security teams or whatever they're called inside that particular business is exactly that. It's about security. It's about availability of data to public models. It's about protecting the company, quite rightly. And one of the things that Salesforce focused on to start with was making sure Agentforce had a really strong trust layer, so that PII information couldn't escape the platform when it went to these models, and it came back in when it was back in from the model, having a look and giving the answer, toxicity detection, all of this kind of stuff. And the ability for agents in Agentforce can't go off topic. They only talk about the topics you give. If you ask Agentforce agent what the capital of Colombia is, it won't answer you unless it's got a topic in there that says it can, right? So all this kind of built-in guardrails means that it's been quite an easy adoption curve for companies. They still need to do the data, the business process, the integration, right? That's all still there. But they don't need to worry about a lot of that layering of security and fear around what the models are doing. And that has enabled things to move quite quickly. So then when we look to the future of Agentforce, I do see that they're rapidly evolving. They are adding a lot more observability of the agents in the coming months. So inside this thing called Command Center, which you just mentioned effectively, there's a tool called Interaction Explorer where you'll be able to look at every agent interaction and pull reports across the interactions to see whether it's been successful or not successful, what topics are being hit the most, which ones are less accurate, so we can performance evaluate the agent and really move things on. It's not to say all the logs and stuff aren't there now, because they are, but it's just really evolving this area into something that's a lot more powerful. Then there's a lot more kind of interactive richness coming. So at the moment, Agentforce is very text-based, right? But the next version of the product recommendations tool from Salesforce, which is called Agentforce for Shoppers, will have kind of rich product images and carousels that you can swipe, and just a much nicer interactive experience. And so those kind of things will make a massive difference to how these interfaces interact. And I suppose my final point is a lot of people might say, oh, well, it looks like Agentforce's capabilities are, quite a few months behind the ability of the kind of cutting edge AI models that are out there that you can do stuff with. And to a certain extent, there's some truth in that, right? But I actually see it as a benefit, not a problem. I haven't met a business yet. I haven't met a CIO, CTO, CDO, CEO, whichever kind of role you want to go for, that genuinely wants to be on the cutting and bleeding edge of what AI is doing because of all the kind of stories that come out the side of that cutting edge, right? They want to be on something that is a bit tried and a bit tested and has those built-in guardrails. And they know it's come from a company that has some serious reputational risk and revenue on the line if they produce tooling that isn't going to be up to standard in the ways that matter in terms of trust. So I've got no issue with that. I see it as when you look towards the cutting edge, what will come towards Agentforce over time. So, for instance, Agentforce has MCP support, which is obviously a really popular kind of agent-to-agent interaction model. So that was prioritized because it was seen as incredibly popular coming out of that cutting edge. Yeah. So I think it's got a really bright future. But the thing we shouldn't miss, Pat, sorry, really long answer, but the thing we really shouldn't miss.
Rob, you can ramble as long as you want. It's all valuable.
But the thing we shouldn't miss is that, and people do miss this, is that Agentforce isn't an isolated piece of technology inside Salesforce. And there's a little bit too much of this going on. I want to do an Agentforce proof of concept. I want to do an AI proof of concept. I want to do whatever. And if we go all the way back to some of our examples earlier on with the bedrock and the kind of how can we reimagine processes in an AI first way? How can we ensure our business processes up to scratch? All that kind of stuff. Sure, use Agentforce to do some kind of early tests and some proof of concepts, proof of values. We're doing that with a couple of customers now. On both sales and service side of things. But how can we see it as part of the bigger picture? How can we see it, as I said earlier about workforces? How can we take our next initiative of kind of our, customer service center, or, maybe it's about lending and it's about mortgages and things like that. So, we there's a whole massive decision process on how a mortgage gets arranged, and there's lots of paperwork, and that is ripe for AI disruption, and we're doing it with a customer right now, actually, to really bring in a lot of agentic power to the whole process. Don't think of Agentforce, think of what's the new world look like? You know what I mean? That's the big question.
So technical readiness just continues to be a theme of this conversation. And I know that you've worked on a catalyst motion that's really helped a lot of companies go from 0 to 100 in terms of just their technical readiness and their ability to deploy agents.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that catalyst motion and what you're doing with organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is the brainchild of some key people in our strategy team, led by Sean Kaplan. So Lee being one of them, Kevin being another, done a lot of good work on this. And as an example, we took this catalyst motion and we ran it with a major bank, and they involved 3 teams, over 80 of their kind of colleagues and people. Went through this process over the course of a week, and they came up with hundreds of ideas for agents. Using that process, we didn't just come up with the ideas, which is part of the process, but we also prioritized those ideas against technical complexity and feasibility. We narrowed them down to a small set of ideas. I think it was about 8 or 10 that got pitched to that bank's exec. And then 3 of them kind of won that pitch competition to be built into production agents effectively. So what the catalyst process does is that it does 2 things simultaneously. One, it takes you rapidly through the process of being able to identify your use cases for agents inside your current business processes. What will be the easiest lift with the highest impact, so that you can prioritize those based on return on investment and get AI working for you as quickly as possible, right? That's the one thing that it's doing. Second thing it's doing, which is actually potentially more important, you could argue, is that it's taking your team on an educating journey so that they really learn about Agentforce, what is there, how it works, what it needs, what's best practice within it, what are the kind of best ideas for it, that kind of thing. And so it's actually educating that whole team on how to think agentically. And that's an incredibly valuable output of that process as well. And it really paves that road for the next set of our processes, which are more around bringing those agents from that point of ideation and kind of validation towards them being kind of built, scaled, and monitored and run. So that's the rest of the process. So yeah, that's Catalyst. It's pretty cool process.
Very cool. It's very cool. And it's a lot of work from the team on our end, from your point, from our strategy team, and exciting to see what the next 6 months looks like as we start to carry it out with organizations. So I
Absolutely.
wanted to wrap up today. I love hearing your thoughts on the trends in the ecosystem and the industry, the news of the day. So I wanted to wrap up with a couple questions. First, Salesforce and Google are teaming up on AI. How do you see that shaping kind of the future of the agentic ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite significant, right? I think that you've got an incredible amount of data that Google's always been sitting on, and they've woken up recently. Like, some people thought that they were quite significantly behind, but if you've gone to Google lately, you will see that Gemini has effectively taken over, right? All of those AI summaries, and then kind of dive into deep dive AI, I think they're calling it at the moment. But all of that's Gemini powered. And so, Salesforce is an open ecosystem, which is good news, right? You can use OpenAI's models, you can use Anthropic's models, you can use Google's models, whatever. But in particular, you can see that on the stage of Dreamforce, you're going to see the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, and Mark Benioff having a conversation. And so there's going to be some big news coming out of that about their partnership and how they're coming together on workforce, particularly AI and workforce. There's quite a few things we know about it that we probably shouldn't say too publicly, but that's going to be a really foundational building block of how that kind of whole AI story is going to unfold. Because what I love about what Salesforce is doing in many ways is that they're not trying to compete with these people, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, whatever. They're trying to leverage the best of the best and marry it with the platform to create the fantastic results. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
So the second big trend I think everybody is probably going to see at Dreamforce is voice. Voice is another thing that continues to come up. So how do you think voice agents are going to transform customer escalations and service?
Yeah, voice is really crucial because at the moment, email, live chat, any of these text-based ones, in theory, you don't need someone at the other end of it if you're doing a human-to-human interaction that can speak English really well. They just need to be able to type and write English quite well. And so that gives you a lot more options. When you actually interact with a kind of call center, then obviously that requirement goes up. And we've all had the experience of speaking with a kind of offshore call center where there is a language barrier, no matter which way you look at it, and things take longer than they should and all that kind of stuff. Then there is this desire sometimes to call kind of voice interaction. So we've been in the voice pilot for a little while with Salesforce, helping them with that. And that's pretty cool. And the absolute key to the whole thing with voice is latency. So I can talk quite quickly. Quite a lot of people do in an accent, right? And so the AI needs to understand that quite rapidly, but it needs to understand it, process it, reason it, think of a response and say the response, all within a reasonable period of time, which is what we're seeing it get towards now. And that's why it's one of the later channels compared to chat or text to get done, because you've got this latency issue. Because as soon as there is an unnatural latency in a conversation, you feel it really quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially like online meetings that we have now, you think your internet's not working properly or whatever if there's a little gap in the latency. So, but once we get over that, and we've already seen a nice demo from Saks Fifth Avenue before with Salesforce, but once we get over that, we will get to this point where these things can transform quite significantly on voice. And so we can, because the other thing is that a lot of people do like to use voice. I don't know how many people send you voice memos now on WhatsApp or text instead of typing because it's faster, right? I mean, I don't like it as much because I'm a bit old school. I do like to type. But that voice memo stuff has gone up really fast. And people are talking into their devices a lot more. Alexa kind of paved the way of that in many different ways. So that understanding is going to be an incredible next kind of channel to fall, if you like, not just for customers, but for internal teams as well.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about the uncanny valley of the images, but I've never really thought about an uncanny valley of voice, right? And how disruptive it can be with the latency there. So that's interesting. So I could talk to you for another 3 hours about this stuff, Rob, but we have to wrap up here. So I just have one last question for you. So if you have one piece of advice for business leaders thinking about the future of agents, thinking about the future of their workforce, what would it be?
Well, apart from the obvious of like talking to us and OSF to help you, I suppose what I'd say primarily is that you need to do two things. You do need to start. So if you haven't started any AI projects, which would be unusual at this stage, but if you haven't done anything significant, then now is the time to start something like that. It's absolutely essential that your team get that learning and start to operationalize that in their minds. So that's kind of a fast start. But at the same time, we need to have in the back of our minds, what are we trying to achieve? So it's still business first, right? What do we want to happen to our customer processes, or what do we want to happen to our business or lending processes or fraud processes, or I don't know, fulfillment processes in retail or guest experiences in hotels or whatever it is? How do we want to move the needle forward in terms of the business? What KPIs do we need to achieve? Bring that business problem to your partners and ask them what they think and how they could solve it. And the good ones will come back with a part agentic, part AI response, hybrid response, because they're already starting to think that way. And that's what your business needs to do as well. So that's slightly more long-term thinking. There's got to be coupled with the short term as well. So start now and think further, I would say.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Business Transformation by OSF Digital. Follow us for more episodes and visit osf.digital to learn more.